Convened as of 4 p.m. I respectfully ask everyone attending the meeting to please mute yourself unless you are recognized to speak. I will now call the roll. First, Vice Chair Catlin.
Here.
Second, Vice Chair Davidson.
Here.
Secretary Sloan. Are you there? I think you're there, Marjorie, but you might have been muted. Okay.
Here, yes, sometimes my space bar works and sometimes it doesn't.
I know, I get it. Treasurer Deschelle.
Here.
And I am here, Geisinger. Other directors in attendance, I see Director Tisdale and Director Williams. Great, welcome. Staff in attendance, we have Deborah Johnson and Jillian Knapp Rhodes, Marie Snell, Ty Shrey Parrish, and Melanie Snyder and Brandy Hunter. And with us today is Jonathan Barch, who is our facilitator again this year for our retreat. First, I'd like to open public comment to anyone who'd like to address the committee regarding any topic listed in the published meeting agenda for the current and immediately preceding month. If you wish to speak and have not already done so, please either raise your virtual hand or press 9 on your phone. Staff will unmute you when it is your turn to speak. If you're dialed in, press *6 to toggle your mute settings. Please bear in mind, by participating in this process, you're being recorded. If you do not wish to be recorded, then your comments will need to be submitted in writing. Comments can be sent to the board office at rtd.boardoffice@rtd-denver.com. Do we have anyone in line to speak today?
No, there are no speakers in the queue and there are no emails.
Great, thank you. All right. With no participants in the queue, we'll close the public comment period at this time. We have one discussion item today. Thanks everyone for making yourselves available for this, our regular executive committee meeting. Jonathan may be able to join us again, but we wanted to give him some time. He got hired with like a 2-week window or maybe a little less, and has been doing a great job calling people. And so I'd like to open the discussion regarding the upcoming board retreat. I think, Jonathan, you've been able to talk to most people, maybe not quite everyone yet. And I think you have a draft agenda for us.
To be with you and talk with most of you already. Doug, we'll connect another time, and Deborah, I think on Monday we have time to talk, but and there are a couple of other board members that I think all of whom may have been in DC as well that I've yet to talk to, but I'll run those down before the retreat. I'd like to just summarize a little bit about some of the things that I've heard.
Great.
That and how they inform the agenda development. One is that there is a discussion that around practical takeaways from this board retreat. One of the things that I've heard from a number of board members is that there's a desire to particularly have more action items, takeaways than there was necessarily last year. One of the things that has been recommended a couple of times is, what are the goals and policy goals for the board in the next 12 months? What's the full list of that? So board members can talk about all of those, and then an effort in this retreat to maybe prioritize what those top, say, 5 goals, priorities, the common across there. So I would do 2 things. One, to build understanding amongst board members that haven't met with each other, certainly in person very much, or are new to the board, as well as for everyone to kind of help to inform each other about the policy goals, aspirations, if you will. And then we do some sort of prioritization of those later, with the assumption that that would be helpful in terms of the providing direction to Deborah and to the staff associated with that. So that's one thing that I've heard and have incorporated into the the agenda. The second thing is about, as I just said, which is a sort of opportunities to build relationships, to understand each other. I've heard the sentences fun, light, relationship building, but can't be cheesy. So I'm still working on the specifics around cheese. And I get that, which is that you want to build a working relationship amongst the board members and find time to do that. So that's also a part of this. Similar to last year's board retreat and some of the comments about, so what are the expectations from communication in terms of respect and clarity and listening related to board relationships? How do you pay attention to that? Generally speaking, what I've heard is that those are going quite well. Some exceptions or some sort of issues that have been more challenging than the others, many of which I think you know about. But sort of strengthening those board-to-board relationships and communication approach, and also then the issues related to how the board staff relationship in terms of, how do you ask for information, communicate your needs as board members, do so amongst with each other in respectful ways, and then also in terms of recognize staff time constraints and other types of things related to board staff relationships, as well as similar to last year in terms of the what are those kind of, how is that going in terms of the perennial board, organizational board policy and operations and what that line is. And so kind of just reviewing that discussion again. And so those are and then the other piece was about really spending some time with, as I said before, about kind of refining some of those priorities as have a work plan or action item to kind of work through there. So I have yet to finish that's a lot of words. And I'm happy to share a screen of a really draft agenda with this group, recognizing that it's that I'm still sort of playing with this with the interviews and really want to kind of make sure that people's voices are heard in terms of the agenda, and you see it as a good use of time. So maybe I'll just stop there, Lynn, and see that I am happy to share the draft agenda, but to see if there's comments or questions about my summary of what I've heard so far and where I see the general direction of the retreat going. You're muted.
Yeah, sorry. Thanks, Jonathan. That sounds great. Any comments or questions on what Jonathan has shared so far before we take a look at the very rough draft agenda, as he's saying?
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Eric.
Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, great. I just was wondering, Jonathan, and thanks for the conversation with me. I know there's a lot of differing ideas. There's 15 people. I just was wondering, you kind of gave some of the common themes. Were there any surprising outliers or anything that, you only heard from one or two members that may be worth noting that perhaps the rest of us didn't think about? Just curious if anything stuck out in the opposite of what you just shared, things that didn't align.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that there's work to do in terms of bringing on new board members. It's a tough job. You all know that. Many of you have been on the board for a long period of time. I think one of the areas and themes that I had talked about or had heard was for newer board members, how is it that that they can get up to speed, that they can make a positive influence and impact associated with the board of directors, how to engage with, quite frankly, with this broader group, the executive committee and others. And I think it's one of the themes or one of the thoughts that have come out of this, and how best to incorporate, and there's always transitions on board. So folks are coming on, folks going off. And just sort of paying attention to that, I think might actually bear some fruit associated with moving forward, a productive conversation related to that. So I would say, Eric, that's one of the areas that I would say is, you know, and with that, a broader theme of communication, right? Which is that, you know, how do you as board members that don't necessarily need to agree, and obviously, you know, you do quite a bit, but how do you talk about when and where you have differences in constructive ways that are not personal, they're policy, and it allows you to kind of build trust and mutual respect. And the other thing that I heard is that the Zoom boxes, just like here, it's a challenge, right? It's a challenge to build relationship. And so that's, again, that other theme of that. And there are new folks on the board. There's new different ways of thinking about things in that regard. So that would be kind of what I would say is an area for potential for working on, or it's not quite a disconnect, although, you know, some might say that. I think it's more about how do you pay attention to the onboarding. I know there's a formal onboarding, but they sort of how do you bring folks on so that they feel like they can find their best place to make a difference at RTD? I think that's the way I would frame it.
Yeah, great. Thank you for sharing that. It makes sense given that we've only have a few new members that you wouldn't have heard that from everybody. And I think that's very helpful feedback. So thank you for answering that open-ended question. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, no, it's a good question and very good good feedback. Anybody else have anything right now? I would just say that I really like the focus on the practical takeaways. I think we had good conversations last year, but I think if we can kind of focus a work plan on and have a chance to talk in small groups or however you put it together about our policy goals for this year and our priorities, that's a great thing. And the other topics I think make a lot of sense.
Yeah. Do you, I guess it'd be helpful from this group to understand that if we are going to have board members come with their sense about really where they want to spend the next 12 months, take 12 months for an example of in terms of their policy goals, how do we prepare them in advance for that? I certainly will clarify that and we can clarify the questions in the agenda, but it's useful for them to be kind of thinking about that it's not only that we want to hear them all, and we also want to get to somewhere like where's the real overlap? Where's the energy associated with that? Because that, you know, policy direction, I think would be useful, and then you can, as others have said, can track that. So, what do you think would work best in terms of getting your fellow board members in the right mindset to come prepared to talk about that? Is that any thoughts on that?
Anybody? I guess I have a couple. One is I think the ZEV committee is meeting next week, and we may be coming up with you know, a suggested policy that we could send out in advance. And maybe we just, I don't know if there's specific topics you're hearing. I'm guessing maybe Tabor code of conduct. You know, maybe we can kind of prime the pump in an email before people come. Do you have some suggestions on that, Jonathan?
Those were my categories of top issues. Tabor and the lack of the losing of the exemption, Tabor exemption, the code of conduct, the Zev Busset piece. There's a couple others maybe around sort of role and orientation. But yeah, I'd be happy to then maybe list out EG and an email that you can forward on, or however you want to communicate with the rest of the board, we can just, you know, call those out as examples for them to be thinking about. I'm actually thinking about it more than, you know, that there might be a sort of a broader sense of them. And one of my intents or one of my thoughts associated with the retreat is to ensure that things that are important to the board that they've been thinking about, they've been talking about, that we get up on a list together, that we look at the comprehensive part of it, that you understand each other's mindsets and motivations associated with those goals. And then, of course, then what we do is we sort of ensure then that there's a narrowing of those as well, so that it kind of is more manageable in terms of what are the things that in general that the board of directors is going to focus on in the next 12 months and hold each other accountable to.
Great. Any other comments? Let's take a look at your agenda if we could.
Yeah,
please.
hopefully it's going to match. The other piece that I wanted to make sure that we sent out was, it was really helpful for me to read the summary from the board meeting from last year, for the board retreat last year.
Oh, good.
And
Yeah.
so, you know, some things have changed and others are, and I think that'd be another useful piece of homework for the board of directors to review, at least before the retreat. So those would be like sort of the two pieces. I'll share my screen. Lynn, can everyone see that?
I see it.
Okay. So we're at the Denver History Museum on Saturday the 25th. Start thought 7:30, 8:15 breakfast to about 3 o'clock. The purpose, broadly speaking, improving the director's interests, motivations, sort of vision for RTD, identify specific ways to improve efficiency around roles, parameters, communication, collaboration among the board and with senior staff, and then identify both policy goals and priorities for the 23-24 for the next 12 months is kind of my vision. So we would start off with breakfast, and I haven't worked with board staff around the sort of the details around any of that, but just that we get started with the actual meeting around 8:15. That I would summarize some of the themes that I've heard in a sort of more concise but sort of informed way. That we would do a bit of a warm-up, non-cheesy exercise as we go, and then we would jump right into it. Key policy goals and aspirations for the next year. Maybe a piece about this is maybe a little bit of a holdover from last year, which is, you know, what do you think that other board members don't understand about your district, and how does it inform your policy goals in that sense? So this is that big list that we talked about. Take a break. We spend about an hour talking about the board roles and parameters, the, you know, role in policy making, ensuring that you use staff time, you know, ensure staff time constraints are recognized, considered, boundaries of policy, governance, operations. Where on this kind of piece amongst board members and or with board and staff do you need to focus on, pay attention to improving further? We would then come back, have lunch, come back after lunch with, okay, here are these broad policy goals and priorities. We'll have had a chance to organize them a little bit, group them, and then we'll do a prioritization study. Now, the priorities don't mean that the issues are not important that don't get prioritized, but it's just that there's a common overlap and an area of focus. And my thinking was that it's going to be about five. I would like to see 5 sort of pieces, but maybe that's too much, or maybe that's too narrow. We would sort of have that list along with, and then not go too far in terms of, okay, so what are the specific next steps? Because I've kind of built in 45 minutes at the end to do this, after a little bit about, you know, how is it that you all communicate, collaborate? One of the things that seemed of interest last year was this idea about moving away from the both and, from the either or kind of discussions to a both and. How do we do both things? The skill set of sort of bringing together seemingly contradictory things that, and I think as board members, it's potentially a useful skill to play around with in the context of okay, how do we do on these policy goals and in perspective? So we'll kind of build off of the earlier, the conversations and at the beginning in the morning and throughout the day. And then we'll spend a good chunk of time, Eric and others, about, okay, so what are the specific action items? Who's responsible? What are some of the measures of success? How will we know that we've made some progress associated with that? And so then we wrap up at 3:00. So that was sort of the idea there. And I'm hoping, I guess the intent of this meeting is to get your feedback about, kind of what does it sound about right? Is there things that you would want to emphasize, de-emphasize? And Lynn, I see Peggy's hand up, but it's not my meeting, sorry.
Thanks. Sorry, I have no voice. I really liked, Lynn, you emphasizing that let's kind of temper some of our aspirational goals with the practical reality of executing them. So I think in that second to last agenda item where we talk about these goals, we really need to look at, okay, some of these are really aspirational. What can we really achieve, maybe short-term, midterm, and long-term, to achieve some of those aspirational goals? And I'm looking probably like the vehicle electrification and some other things, but I just think we need to have that part of the discussion. Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's a good, that's sort of the idea of the priorities over the next 12 months and the overlay of what's practical, and also not to lose sight of some of the more aspirational parts. I do think that one of the ground rules that I was thinking about, which is, we're not going to address the code of conduct. We're not going to address the code of conduct issues at the retreat. We're not going to, the ZEB bus, sort of issue in that piece. But what we want to do is try to understand the importance of and around those particular issues, but recognize that those are decisions that'll be made in, I believe, in the executive committee and others. And so I don't know quite what that line is in terms of that, but I know that that's important, not to try to go too far on any one issue necessarily in the retreat, but and more about setting that up. So. You're still muted, Lynn. Lynn, you're muted.
Unmute, Lynn.
Sorry, can you go down on the retreat agenda so we can see the kind of the morning? There were a lot of questions there. Oh.
There are probably too many questions. That's why this is really drafty, is because I think there's too many questions there. So I just started typing, and I think you probably need to have three questions here. And the goal that I have is to incorporate your feedback, and I'm happy to distribute this out, and then get this out to the board of directors as a draft agenda tomorrow, to the extent that that's possible to do. So
that would be great. They
have a week, along with I can attach the meeting notes from last year, as well as there was one other topic here. The request for their policy, to be thinking about their policy goals.
Okay, should we prime that at all with some of the policy goals you've been hearing? The other one I didn't mention that you said, that I mentioned before, and you said you were hearing, where the board, coming up with people coming up with an individualized plan and getting support from the staff, which they're always happy to do with talking points to get people out to their local communities and city councils. Is another specific topic, and maybe we don't want to talk specific topics. We just want to let them come up. Do we want to suggest some of what you've heard just to move things forward? It seems like maybe that would make sense.
I agree with that, and I think that's a good one. Sort of general approaches and understandings regarding outreach to districts and support necessary associated with that. So that would be one of the policy goals, e.g., Tabor, code of conduct, the buses, individual sort of outreach and efforts, those kinds of things we want to put on the table. Those are things I heard, and I think it's useful for everybody on the board to hear it from each other. So I see Eric and then Marjorie's hand up.
Eric, go ahead.
Thanks, Lynn. Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, this is a great starting point. Thank you for putting this together so quickly. I think one question I have on the 10:30 to 11:30, and you mentioned this is draft, so there are a lot of questions, but there's a lot in there and there's a lot of potential for this one to run away. I was wondering if you might kind of scroll down a little bit with what the objective of this session was, and wondered if you, yeah, okay, great, thank you. And wondered if you wouldn't mind talking through just how do you see approaching that in a structured way where we, kind of get some meaningful takeaways? I mean, in my mind, there's some big ones in there. There's the how we engage with staff, and make sure there's a respectful relationship back and forth there. There's the topic of board's role. Anyway, just wondering, because there's a lot in this for an hour.
Yeah.
With an important objective at the end. How do you foresee structuring this? Is it trimming it down? Is it particular structured question? This seems to me to be one of the ones that's going to have to be the most well structured to get through it in an hour. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, you're right. One of the things I want to do is narrow the number of questions. And part of my thinking was, I'll just put all the questions that I thought might fit under there. I forget the saying, sorry, I didn't have time to write you a shorter letter. But I sort of
right.
plan to narrow and sculpt those down, and particularly your input. But my thought here in terms of was one, using small groups, board members that sort of don't typically necessarily engage with each other, having some discussion around these in a kind of a report back fashion with probably, like I said, probably just 3 questions. And I beg your sort of your input associated, which ones that you think would be the most important on that. But honestly, Eric, I haven't necessarily thought that one through in terms of mostly what I was trying to capture was content in taking the interviews and putting this in at this moment. And I'm going to put from this point forward some real thoughts once we kind of we're in the ballpark, which is the mechanism about how to implement it. But I agree with you that this is an important topic. It's a runaway topic in terms of time frame potential and sort of ensuring that this objective, if you agree with that, is being able to accomplish. I need to put a little bit more time into that, and any advice you have is welcome.
Yeah, thanks for commenting on that. I mean, that's great. Narrowing it down and having the report back function, I think could take us a ways. And there's probably a way to, yeah, I can appreciate the challenge here. Narrowing down, I think would benefit. And I think when you send this out to us, I'll be happy to give some thought to that and send out if I have any useful thoughts to contribute to that. But the report back and the time, the time constraint being known at the beginning and having a narrow scope of questions, I think are helpful. So thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
Marjorie.
I can't hear you.
No, still muted.
I can tell some of your emotion regardless of if I can hear your voice.
Yeah, still
We
nothing.
still can't. Sorry, we still can't hear you, Marjorie.
Do you want to try to get out and come back in, Marjorie, or something? Yeah, okay. We'll go on to Doug.
Thank you very much, Lynn. I appreciate that, Madam Chair. One thing that I note in this session, the 10:30 to 11:30 slot is what caught my eye, and it's obviously an incredibly important time for us. And I like the objective that you pose at the end of that, because I think you articulated that very clearly in terms of what we want to do. And that's why when I look at something about how do we ensure staff time constraints are recognized / considered, to me, that's more of part of the management function of the board of itself and not really as much a retreat topic. And if you're retooling these questions, I would consider that to be one that you might look at. We did actually, FYI, and I don't know if anybody forwarded to you, but I think it was in 2019, it might have been in 2018, we actually adopted a policy that expressly addressed board interaction with staff, particularly the board office staff, and requests for information and producing things and so forth, that we limited the amount of time that a board member could reasonably expect staff to devote to their individual questions that were raised for any particular reason. Because at the time we had one board member who was constantly issuing, in effect, FOIA requests that just really burdened staff. So we do have that policy outstanding. And I think the other stuff that you have here is really significant. I mean, the point is, let's clarify so that, and particularly for the new board members, but even for those of us who've been around longer, understanding our role in policy making and clarifying the boundaries and areas of overlap between management and policy is critical. So I appreciate the work you put into this. As I say, I raised that one question as perhaps, and it's my thought alone, I don't know if others join in that we might consider excising that because it's actually addressed in a policy. Thank you. Maybe I've stalled long enough for Marjorie to get back in. I don't know.
Did you get, can you speak now?
I hope so.
Hey,
I was speaking only to myself before. Yeah, I appreciate this draft and the idea of sending out the notes from the last retreat will be really helpful. But also in preparation, I suggest asking the board members to review the strategic plan so that we don't come up with policies that are contrary to it and where they fit in the strategic plan, so that we are in alignment with work that has been done in the past.
Good suggestion.
that's a good question and suggestion, and maybe it's a criteria or criterion for priorities, is that sort of that they align. There is an alignment with the strategic plan. I think that's an assumption and a good one. So yeah, I'm just. I'll stop sharing now just so I can see you.
I have a couple of comments there.
Keep sharing.
It doesn't matter. You could, but the same thing jumped out to me that jumped out to Doug Tisdale, but I thought about it differently. Is that's maybe part of the communication discussion that we're having. It's really kind of separate from the policy versus operations, and
I like it.
So it may be that it blends in with some of that. And this I can certainly be voted down on. It's kind of ministerial, but I think that people getting there for breakfast is kind of important. We got 45 minutes there. Starting at 7:30 is tough. My preference would be to make it 8 to 3:30. If
Okay, sure.
Do others agree? I see one thumbs up from Doug and Marjorie. Okay.
I'm not a morning person anyhow, so this is going to be brutal, but that's great news.
Yeah, getting down there at 7:30, and I think the tendency is to say, well, I'll show up at 8:10, and But we do have new people. We haven't been meeting together, even with people who've been on for a couple of years, it's a new thing. So let's start it a little later. Thanks. All right, Marjorie.
Yes, this is sort of similar to your issue. I mean, last retreat, we were confined by COVID seating, where we were at separate tables and there was, never a feeling that we were all together. What should our expectations be about seating this year? Can there be a true roundtable?
It's a good question.
Yeah, that was one of the more interesting meetings with everybody at their individual pods, basically. And I think that's right. And clarifying the expectation of that. Obviously, I think, well, maybe it's not so obvious, but from my perspective, having a more interactive setup in terms of room arrangement would be preferential. But I respect kind of how you all want to have that done.
Yeah, I tend to agree. Anybody else? If we set up more of a circle, or is that kind of what you would suggest, Jonathan?
Yeah, or pod, like sort of pods that with board members. We had some ideas. My colleague Patrick Teese, who's not with us right now, and I had some ideas about, maybe there's mixing up board members who may, represent different districts or different kinds of ways in which people can interact with each other. That would be my hope and again, we'll put some more thoughts to that, but if there's some flexibility there around the room arrangement and how we sit and engage, and that would be, as I said, that would be what we would prefer.
Good. Peggy,
you can't be moving around very much though, can you?
I feel really bad because I am, after my last doctor's appointment, I'm restricted. I can't come down. So, but I really would, if I were able to be there, I would applaud that approach for more engagement among members. And I really am sad that I'm not going to be able to participate in that fashion, but I will participate via Zoom.
we've had a rough winter, rough few weeks. Yeah.
We're sad too.
I want to do over on 2023. Just
Yeah, no kidding. Hopefully it'll get better. And I like what you said, Jonathan, about, maybe it's mixing up the seating some during the day and the groups and all that. I think makes a lot of sense. All right. Any other
comments? This sounds like really good input, and I'll incorporate it. What I have for distribution sometime tomorrow is the draft agenda, the notes from the 2022 retreat, the strategic plan, and asking the board around thinking about their policy goals, seated with just some examples, e.g., ZEB buses or code of conduct or those kind of things, just to get them thinking about what that might be. And so I'll draft that email and I'll forward that on to you, Lynn. Is that how is
send it to me and to the board office as well, if you have that, or I can give you that email. Well, Ty-Shrey, why don't you tell him the email just to make sure he's got it handy, if you would, please.
Oh, I have.
You got it? Board office. Okay.
Yeah. What about the Doug, you talked about the 2019 board staff communication policy, I believe is what you called it. Is that worth distributing? Is that, I might suggest not to, well,
yeah, I don't know that. Yeah, my thought would be, we don't want to necessarily shine a spotlight on that and give a sense that we're trying to somehow intimidate or forestall interaction with staff. But should the occasion arise in the future where we find that there is a burden on staff, then we could politely advise the director involved relative to the existence of that policy and provide a copy. So yeah, I'm not out for trying to say, now listen, folks, don't you for, that's not my goal at all.
I understand that. Would you mind at least just sending it to me? I guess I can find it. I just want to make sure that I've.
Well, and I think, and to go back to Ty Schrey and get Ty Schrey's engagement on this, I think she might more easily be able to find that policy and forward it to you. I know I have it somewhere, but my filing system is purely by date, not by subject. So I'd have to search back through 2018 and 2019 to find it, because I know it's something that Barbara and I worked on, during my terms as chair.
Cool. Well, I'll get it. Thanks for that. We won't send it out.
Just a quick question. I see Deborah and Melanie both here. Any comments, thoughts? I know you're going to talk with Jonathan on Monday, Deborah.
No, just listening to the discussion. Hi, Jonathan. Good afternoon,
Deborah.
everyone. No, I don't have anything to add at this time.
Great. Thanks.
Thanks.
Melanie.
And I don't have anything to add. I was just going to say, I think that the resolution Director Tisdale's talking about, there was one in 2019 that had to do with board operating guidelines, but then there were also resolutions in 1986 and 1996 with the ones that have to do with the amount of staff time. Those
Oh,
are
gosh.
typically referenced in the 2019 guidelines, but those are the documents I'm familiar with.
So it's not a new discussion then.
No.
Hmm.
So, okay.
Well, I really look forward to this meeting. I think it's going to be productive. I'm glad we're generally on the right track. We'll make some changes, get that information out, and then we have next Thursday as well. As at the same time, is that right? 3 o'clock.
Yeah, that's our regular executive committee meeting. So we can talk and see what you've heard back. If we need to have you back in, which probably makes sense, that'd be great. Thanks.
Sure. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Are there other matters to discuss? All right.
Sign off.
Yeah, thanks, Jonathan. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Great.
Second.
Thanks. We are adjourned. Thanks for coming together. I think this was a helpful meeting, and we have another crack at it. I think it's good that Jonathan's getting something out hopefully tomorrow, so people have some time to digest, think about, react. And I will see you next Thursday that one's at 3. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Thanks for doing that.